The bar door creaked open with a long, tired groan. The kind that made every head turn even when people pretended they weren't interested. Rusty Bear Bar was never quiet, but tonight it felt unusually charged, like the kind of night where trouble walks in before the alcohol does. Cigarette smoke floated thick in the air. Neon lights flickered against scratched wooden tables, and loud laughter from the biker gang at the center table drowned out the jukebox. Then Steven Seagal stepped inside. He wasn't wearing anything flashy. No entourage. No cameras. Just a black jacket, worn jeans, and that calm, unbothered expression he was famous for. He walked with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who didn't feel the need to prove anything to anyone, and that alone was enough to irritate the men who built their entire personalities around intimidation. The moment the bikers saw him, the noise grew louder, not naturally, but in that forced, mocking way loud men try to impress other loud men. One of them, a giant with a beard that looked like it hadn't been washed since last summer, slapped the table and yelled, "Well, look who crawled in. Old Man Seagal." Another biker leaned back in his chair, arms spread wide, smirking. "Hey Hollywood, lose your stunt team? Or are you here to practice running away?" Their laughter echoed through the bar like a pack of hyenas circling prey. Steven didn't react. He didn't even acknowledge them. He simply walked to the counter, nodding politely at the bartender, who looked too nervous to decide whether to greet him or pretend he didn't see him. That calmness, the quiet, unshakable silence made the bikers even louder. A third biker with snakes tattooed across his neck shouted, "Hey, we're talking to you, Grandpa Ninja." Steven slowly turned his head, the way a man does when he's deciding whether something is worth his time. His eyes were calm, too calm, the kind of calm that unsettles men who only understand power when it's loud. "We don't like movie stars here," the leader growled. "I'm not here to bother anyone," Steven said softly. "Oh, but you're already bothering us," the leader sneered, standing up. Chairs scraped, boots thudded. A circle began to form, and just as the biggest biker grabbed Steven's shoulder, the bar door opened again. Heavy footsteps, a shadow larger than the doorway. Every biker froze mid-breath, because the man who walked in next was Chuck Norris. Rain tapped steadily against the windows of Rusty Bear Bar, streaking down the glass like thin silver threads. Outside, the parking lot glistened with puddles reflecting neon signs. But inside, the atmosphere remained thick, loud, and almost suffocating, a place where the air smelled of gasoline, sweat, and stale beer. Rusty Bear wasn't just a bar, it was territory. A home base for the Iron Fang biker gang, a group known as much for their loud engines as their short tempers. On any other night, they would have kept to themselves, drinking, bragging, occasionally threatening someone for fun. But tonight was different. Tonight, the universe had placed Steven Seagal inside their circle, and nothing irritated men like them more than someone who refused to be intimidated. Steven sat quietly at the polished metal counter, his back straight, posture relaxed. He didn't slouch, didn't fidget, didn't try to blend in. He took up space not with volume, but with presence, an unnerving one for men who relied on shouting to feel important. The bartender, a middle-aged man with nervous hands, placed a cup of hot tea in front of Steven. Tea, of all things, looked strangely out of place in a bar ruled by bikers and beer kegs. "You sure you don't want something stronger?" the bartender whispered, glancing nervously at the bikers behind him. "This is strong enough," Steven replied with a faint smile. Across the room, the bikers watched like restless wolves. Their leader, a huge man named Rocco, sat in the center, boots propped on a chair, leather vest decorated with patches that told stories of past brawls. His beard was braided, his arms tattooed, and his ego extremely well-fed. Rocco's second in command, Viper, a skinny man with sharp features and a snake tattoo wrapped around his neck, leaned in and muttered, "He's ignoring us, boss." "I noticed," Rocco growled, cracking his knuckles. "Think he's better than us? He looks calm," Viper sneered. "I hate calm," another biker chimed in. "He's probably scared, trying to act tough." But that wasn't true, and deep down, they felt it. There's a kind of quiet that comes from fear, and a different kind of quiet that comes from complete control. Steven had the second kind. Rocco finally slammed his mug on the table. "Enough. Let's welcome our guest." The gang got up, not all at once, but like a ripple spreading across the water. Chairs scraped, boots thudded. A low tension rose, heavy enough to silence even the humming jukebox. Steven didn't turn around. He simply lifted his tea, inhaling the steam as if it were the most peaceful scent in the world. Rocco reached the counter first, planting his hand on it with a loud thud. The bartender flinched. Steven didn't. "You're drinking tea in our bar," Rocco said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "I am," Steven replied softly. "You looks like you're meditating, old man," Viper added from the side. Steven finally glanced at them, eyes calm. "Just relaxing." "Relaxing?" Rocco snorted. "In our bar?" Without permission, Steven took a slow sip of his tea, not rushing his answer. "I didn't realize calm required permission." The gang behind Rocco burst into laughter, the kind that wasn't happy, just loud. The bartender whispered, barely audible, "Maybe you should leave." Steven shook his head gently. "I'm not here to cause trouble." But trouble was already circling him. Rocco leaned closer, breath smelling of beer and ego. "See, this is our place. And when someone new walks in, we like to test their manners," another biker added. "Especially when they act like they're above us." "I don't think that," Steven said. "I just mind my own business." "But we're making you our business," Viper hissed. One of the younger bikers, desperate to impress the older ones, nudged Steven's shoulder with unnecessary force. Steven didn't even blink. The stillness disturbed them more than anger would have. Rocco lifted an empty bottle and tapped it against the counter near Steven's elbow. "Tell you what, we'll let you stay if you apologize for ignoring us." Steven placed his cup down gently. "I didn't mean disrespect. I just don't engage unless necessary." Rocco raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you'll engage tonight." The tension tightened. A few customers quietly slipped out the door, sensing what was coming. The bartender stepped back, placing a hand under the counter as if contemplating calling someone, but who would come? This was Iron Fang territory. Steven finally turned fully toward the gang, folding his hands calmly. "Respect goes both ways," he said. That sentence alone angered the bikers more than any insult would have. "Are you lecturing us?" Viper snapped. "No," Steven replied. "Just telling the truth." Rocco grabbed Steven's jacket collar hard. "Truth is whatever I decide in this bar." Silence thickened like fog. Then it happened. A distant rumble. Not thunder, not bikes. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Controlled. Every biker glanced toward the entrance. The door didn't just open. It expanded around the figure that walked through. A man with a beard like granite, presence like a storm, and eyes that made even tough men stand straighter. Chuck Norris. He scanned the room slowly, and the energy in the bar shifted like a sudden drop in temperature. Rocco's grip on Steven's collar weakened, visibly shaking, because the one man on earth bikers feared more than the law was now standing in their doorway, and he wasn't here for them. He was here for Steven. A stillness settled over the Rusty Bear bar, thick and unnatural. It wasn't silence, but something heavier, the kind that happens right before a storm breaks. Every biker, every customer, even the bartender, stood frozen as Chuck Norris took 3 slow steps inside. His boots hit the wooden floor like warning drums. Rocco's hand, still gripping Steven's jacket, trembled. Even he couldn't hide it. The Iron Fang gang might have believed they ruled this bar, but they didn't rule Chuck Norris. Chuck looked around the room with the calm confidence of a man who'd seen more danger in a day than these bikers had seen in their entire lives. His eyes landed on Steven, and a faint smile tugged at his lips, an unspoken recognition between two legends who didn't need introductions. Steven gave a small, respectful nod, as if saying, "Good timing," but Chuck didn't speak yet. He didn't need to. His presence alone pressed on the room like a weight. Rocco swallowed hard, forcing a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. Who invited the cowboy?" Chuck turned his head slowly toward him. Even that made Rocco take half a step back. Steven calmly reached up and removed Rocco's hand from his collar, not aggressively, not violently, just effortlessly, like sliding a leaf off a table. "You should let go," Steven said softly. "Wouldn't want misunderstandings." Rocco puffed out his chest, desperately trying to regain his dominance. "Misunderstanding? You walk into our bar and act like you own the place. And now your old friend here wants to play hero?" A few bikers laughed nervously, encouraging their leader. Chuck walked forward, each step echoing. Hero? He repeated. No, I'm just here for a drink. There was something terrifying about how calmly he said it. The bartender scrambled to grab a clean glass, hands shaking so badly he dropped it. The shattering sound cracked the tension, but only for a second. Viper leaned toward Rocco, whispering, "Boss, maybe we should chill." "That's Chuck Norris," Rocco hissed. "Shut up. If we back down now, we lose our respect." But the truth was written across every biker's face. They weren't sure they had any respect left to lose. Steven stood, the bar stool sliding quietly behind him. "I told you I didn't come for trouble." "Yeah?" Rocco snarled, face red, ego wounded. "But trouble came to you." With a roar more fear than fury, Rocco swung a punch straight at Steven's jaw. The room gasped. Steven didn't. He moved only inches, tilting his head just enough for the punch to slice through empty air. Rocco stumbled forward, off balance, and crashed shoulder first into the counter. Before he could even recover, two more bikers lunged at Steven from the sides. Steven placed his teacup down. That was the only movement he made. The two bikers' arms reached him and stopped. Not because Steven had blocked them, because their wrists were suddenly held in midair by Chuck Norris. He gripped them lightly, almost politely, as if merely helping them steady themselves. But the bikers winced, their faces twisting from the pressure of his grip. "Boys," Chuck said calmly, "this seems unnecessary." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried across the entire bar like thunder, disguised as a whisper. The bikers yanked their arms back the moment he released them, shaking their hands as if burned. Rocco finally stood up, furious and humiliated. "Fine," he shouted. "You want to play tough? Let's see how tough you two really." He didn't finish. Steven's hand shot forward with the quiet speed of falling rain, tapping two fingers against a nerve in Rocco's forearm. Instantly, the biker's arm went numb, dropping uselessly to his side. Rocco stared in disbelief. What did you?" Steven took one small step forward, his voice still soft. "I warned you." Viper, shaking, pulled out a chain, swinging it threateningly. "Back off. I'll use it." Chuck raised one eyebrow. "Are you sure?" Viper froze. Everyone knew the legend. Chuck Norris doesn't fear weapons. Weapons fear Chuck Norris. The chain slipped from Viper's hands and clattered to the floor. The tension in the room snapped. The bikers weren't brave men, they were loud men. And loud men fall silent when real strength enters the room. But Rocco wasn't ready to quit. His pride was bleeding, his ego battered. He grabbed a pool cue from the rack and pointed it shakily at Steven. "You think you're special?" he shouted. "You walk in here, acting all quiet and holy. Well, guess what? I'm not scared of..." Crack. Chuck didn't even move fast. He simply placed his hand on the cue and squeezed. The wooden stick splintered cleanly in half with a sound that made every biker flinch. Rocco stood frozen, holding two useless pieces of wood. Steven looked at him gently. "Sometimes, the quietest man in the room is the one you should watch." Chuck nodded. "And sometimes the loudest man is the easiest to break." The bar was dead silent. The Iron Fang gang had been humbled, but the conflict wasn't over, because humiliation is one thing, but consequences are another, and both were coming. The Rusty Bear bar had fallen so silent that even the flickering neon sign outside felt louder than the people inside. For a long moment, no one moved. Not the bartender, not the customers hiding behind tables, and certainly not the bikers whose swagger had evaporated the moment Chuck Norris splintered the pool cue like a dry twig. Rocco stared at the broken pieces in his hands, chest rising and falling erratically. His mind raced, scrambling to assemble the image of himself he had spent years building, the alpha, the king of this bar, the man everyone feared. But that image lay shattered on the sticky bar floor beside the broken cue. Viper took a shaky step back, his boots scraping the wood. The snake tattoo on his neck twitched as he swallowed. "Boss, maybe we should, let it go." Rocco shot him a glare. But it lacked power. It lacked everything. The remaining bikers exchanged real looks. Not the kind they wore like masks to intimidate strangers, but the helpless, confused, fear-glazed looks of men realizing they were vastly outmatched. Steven Seagal stood calm in the center of it all, hands folded behind his back, posture perfectly straight. If he felt adrenaline, it didn't show. If he felt anger, it didn't show. If he felt anything at all, it was unreadable. A living stillness. Chuck Norris took a seat at an empty table, casually brushing a bit of dust off the chair as if he were settling into his living room instead of the headquarters of a biker gang. "Steven," he said, "you didn't tell me this place had such energetic hospitality." Steven offered a faint smile. "Thought it might be quieter tonight. A few customers, sensing the shift, attempted to sneak out the back door, but even their footfalls sounded scared." The bartender remained frozen behind the counter like a man who had witnessed something supernatural and was unsure whether to call for help or pray. Rocco finally found his voice. What do you two want?" Steven turned to him slowly. "Just a peaceful evening." Chuck nodded. "A drink, maybe a decent chair." Rocco blinked, confused. That's it?" "That's it," Steven confirmed. The simplicity of the answer hit the bikers harder than any punch would have. They'd built up a confrontation in their heads, imagined some cinematic showdown, convinced themselves they were in control. But reality had stripped them bare. Viper, overwhelmed by the sudden lack of direction, sputtered, "Okay, so you're not here to pick a fight?" Steven gave him a gently puzzled look. "You were the ones picking the fight." Viper winced as if slapped. Rocco rubbed his numb arm, wincing. "Look, we didn't know who you two were." Chuck raised a brow. "Does that matter?" The question sliced deeper than any threat. Because it was true. If Steven had been any other quiet man, the bikers still would have pushed him, mocked him, tried to break him. Their power only existed when directed downward. A shifting murmur floated around the room as customers whispered among themselves. "Serves them right. They finally messed with the wrong guys. I knew this was gonna blow up." The whispers weren't mocking anymore. They were relieved, grateful, almost admiring. Rocco's face twisted, his pride bleeding out. "What do you want from us?" he asked again, voice cracking slightly. Steven looked around the room slowly. "Respect," the single word echoed. Chuck added calmly, "And not just for people who look strong to you." Rocco's eyes darted between the two men, fear starting to mix with something else, shame. The bikers shifted uncomfortably. Men who spent years taking pride in dominance now found themselves exposed like children scolded for misbehaving. Steven took a step closer. Viper flinched violently. "Relax," Steven said softly. "If I wanted to hurt you, I would have done it the moment you grabbed me." Rocco swallowed. "So, you're letting us go?" Steven nodded. "It's not my place to punish you." Chuck leaned back in his chair. "But that doesn't mean there won't be consequences." The bikers tensed again. Chuck motioned toward the bartender. "He's been dealing with your bullying for years." The bartender froze. "Me?" Rocco whipped his head around. "What?" "We're fair to him. He breaks glasses when you shout," Chuck said. "He hides in the back at least once a night. He hasn't had a peaceful shift in months." The bartender's eyes widened, stunned that someone had seen his struggle. Steven stepped forward. "The way you treat the quietest people in the room tells everything about who you really are." The bar fell into shameful silence. Viper fiddled with his gloves like a boy trying to avoid blame. We didn't mean, maybe sometimes we go a little far." Rocco clenched his jaw, but the arrogance had drained from his eyes. Only confusion and bruised pride remained. "Help fix it," Steven said gently. "Start tonight." Rocco hesitated, pride warring with fear. Then he nodded slowly, painfully. "All right." Steven looked at Chuck. Chuck nodded once. It was enough. But tensions didn't ease. They merely shifted. Because while the bikers had been put in their place, they still didn't know the full truth. They didn't know why Chuck had walked in. They didn't know who Steven truly was to him. They didn't know what was coming next. Only Steven and Chuck exchanged a silent look, the kind that said the real reveal was just around the corner. And when it came, it would flip the entire bar upside down. The Rusty Bear bar had settled into a strange, fragile quiet. The kind that wasn't peaceful, just tense. Like everyone was waiting for something they didn't understand. Rocco stood stiffly with his hands at his sides. Viper hunched behind him. The rest of the bikers gathered like a pack of confused animals, unsure whether to run or bow. Steven and Chuck stood in the center of the room, calm as unmoving mountains. But beneath that calm, something was building. Rocco cleared his throat, voice shaky. "So, we apologized. We backed off. What else is there?" Chuck's eyes flicked toward Steven, as if silently asking, "Should we tell them?" Steven gave a small nod. Chuck leaned his elbow on the counter, addressing the bikers as if they were students waiting on a lesson they wouldn't like. "You think this bar belongs to you," he began quietly. "But it doesn't." Rocco frowned. "What are you talking about? We've run this place for years." Chuck let out the faintest chuckle. "Running it and owning it are two different things." The bartender froze mid-motion, eyes widening. Customers stopped whispering. Even the neon sign outside flickered as though it sensed something shifting. Steven's hands rested calmly at his sides, but his words were sharp as steel wrapped in silk. "The Rusty Bear Bar," he said softly, "was under new ownership 6 months ago." Rocco blinked. "Huh? Bought?" Steven clarified. "Fully." Viper squinted, confused. "By who? Some corporation? That old landlord guy?" Chuck turned to Steven. "You want to tell them? Or should I?" Steven stepped forward, voice low but clear. "I'm the new owner." The bar exploded in whispers. "What? No way. Is he serious? He bought the bar?" Rocco's jaw dropped. You own this place?" Steven nodded once. "And you still came in here, alone?" Viper sputtered. "Without telling us? Didn't feel the need," Steven said. "I wanted to see this place the way it really was." Rocco staggered backward like someone had shoved him. But why didn't you say anything when you tried to intimidate me?" Steven finished gently. "Because I wanted your real behavior, not your pretend respect." That sentence alone felt like a blow. Chuck looked at the bikers, eyes steady. "He wanted to see how you treat people when you think they're beneath you." The bikers' faces drained of color. The bartender, finally processing everything, whispered, You own the bar?" Steven smiled warmly. "Yes, and you're safe here now." The bartender's eyes filled with emotion. For years, he had endured threats, insults, humiliation, and tonight, his quiet prayers had been answered in a way he never imagined. By the bar's silent new owner. Rocco, trembling with a mixture of shock and humiliation, pointed at Steven. You set us up." Steven shook his head. "No. You set yourselves up," Chuck added. "He didn't force you to threaten him. He didn't force you to act like bullies. Those were your choices." The gang looked around, as if searching for an escape from the truth. Rocco's voice cracked. "So, what now? You gonna kick us out? Ban us?" Steven exchanged a meaningful look with Chuck, an unspoken agreement passing between them. Chuck placed his hands on the counter. "We're not here to punish you." The bikers exhaled audibly, relief momentarily passing through their shoulders. "But," Chuck continued. Every biker stiffened. Steven stepped closer until he was standing right in front of Rocco. Not aggressive, not threatening, just present. "You're not being banned," Steven said. "You're being given a choice." Rocco looked up, confused. "A choice?" Steven nodded. "This bar stays open to everyone. But from tonight forward, you treat people with respect. Customers, staff, each other. No more intimidation, no more bullying, no more cruelty." Viper swallowed hard. "And if we say no?" Chuck's voice was soft, but it carried danger in its simplicity. "Then you're choosing a future you do not want." Viper shivered without meaning to. Rocco glanced at his gang, then back at Steven. His pride was in tatters, but something in his expression shifted, fear turning into reluctant understanding. "You're serious about this?" he whispered. Steven nodded. "Completely." Rocco rubbed the back of his neck, defeated. "And if we follow your rules?" Steven stepped back just enough to give him space. "Then you're welcome, all of you." Chuck folded his arms. "Respect earns respect. You give it, you get it." The bikers slowly lowered their heads, one after another, not out of fear, not out of force, but out of realization. Steven had walked into their bar not to fight them, but to change them. Rocco finally breathed in deeply. "All right, we'll do it." Steven nodded. Chuck nodded, and the bar, once filled with tension, felt strangely lighter. Not safe, not healed, but changing. Yet the night wasn't finished, because while the bikers had accepted Steven's ownership, they still didn't know why Chuck Norris had come with him, or what Steven planned next for the bar. And the real turning point, the moment that would define the fate of Rusty Bear forever, was just moments away. The Rusty Bear felt different the next morning, quieter, almost humbled. The sun filtered through the dusty windows, catching motes of light drifting through the air. Steven unlocked the front door right at 8 a.m. Chuck standing beside him with a coffee in hand. "Never thought I'd see this place sober," Chuck joked, sipping casually. Steven smiled. "Never thought I'd own it." They stepped inside. The bar was a mess, chairs knocked over, shattered glass still in corners, spilled beer dried on the floor. Evidence of the chaos from last night lingered everywhere, but instead of frustration, Steven felt a strange sense of purpose. "We could hire someone to clean," Chuck offered. Steven shook his head. "No. I want to start this right." Before Chuck could respond, the door creaked open behind them. The bikers stood outside. Rocco, Viper, Hawk, Ghost, Diesel, every man from last night, except now their expressions were different. No swagger, no smirks, no dominance, just uneasiness. And something that looked like a first attempt at humility. Rocco cleared his throat. We came to help clean." Chuck raised an eyebrow, amused. "Volunteering? Huh?" Viper scratched his beard, embarrassed. "Well, last night wasn't exactly our best moment," Hawk added quietly. "We figured, if we're gonna follow the new rules, we should start somewhere." Steven exchanged a look with Chuck, one of silent approval. "All right," Steven said. "Come in." The bikers moved inside slowly, almost respectfully, as if stepping into someone else's home. Rocco picked up a broom without a word. Viper grabbed a trash bag. Ghost knelt to collect broken glass with careful precision. Chuck crossed his arms, nodding. "Seems like you got through to them." "We got through to them," Steven corrected. For the next hour, everyone worked quietly. No jokes, no ego, just effort. And strangely, the tension that once filled the bar began to melt away. At one point, Rocco approached Steven, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Look, about last night," he muttered. "We were out of line." Steven paused his mopping. "You were," Rocco swallowed. "We thought this place was ours. We acted like kings. But you owning it, knowing the whole time, it kinda made us see how stupid we looked." Steven studied him for a moment. Not with anger, not with judgment, just understanding. "People mess up," Steven said. "Real strength is changing afterward." Rocco nodded slowly, as if absorbing the words like medicine that burned going down but healed afterward. Across the room, Chuck watched the exchange with approval. "You've always been good at this, Steven." Steven sighed. "Good at what?" "Taking broken things," Chuck replied, "and fixing them." Steven didn't answer, but the tiny, tired smile on his face said enough. By noon, the bar looked completely different. Clean counters, swept floors, fresh air. The Rusty Bear looked less like a biker hideout, and more like a real bar again. When the work was done, the bikers stood in a line. Waiting awkward, unsure, Steven addressed them calmly. "I'm not here to erase your past. You built a reputation, one you're not proud of now." Viper exhaled. "We know, but," Steven continued, "I'm offering you something better, if you want it." Rocco hesitated. "Better? How?" Steven leaned against the counter. "This place will become a real community bar, safe, inclusive, no intimidation, no fights." Hawk blinked. "Inclusive? Like families?" "Families," Steven confirmed. "Travelers, local workers, anyone," Diesel asked. "And what does that mean for us?" Chuck stepped forward. "It means you're welcome here, but not as tyrants," Steven added. "As regular customers, or better contributors." The gang exchanged uncertain looks. "What kind of contributors?" Viper asked. Steven pointed at each of them. "Hawk, your carpentry skills? I need new shelving built." "Diesel, you fix engines. We're restoring the outdoor sign." "Ghost, you're good with numbers. I need inventory logs organized." "Rocco, you already know everyone in town. Help me rebuild trust." The bikers were stunned, not controlled, not punished, included. "Why would you trust us with all that?" Rocco whispered. Steven shrugged lightly. "Because last night you chose to walk away instead of escalating. That matters." Chuck clapped his hands once. "So what'll it be? Help fix what you broke, or keep living the same old cycle?" The bikers looked at each other, then slowly nodded. Rocco was the first to speak. "We'll help. All of us." Steven extended his hand. Rocco hesitated, then shook it firmly. This time, not as enemies, not as rivals, but as men choosing a better path. For the first time in years, something shifted inside the Rusty Bear. Not the sound of violence, not the vibration of fear, but the quiet beginning of transformation. When the bikers finally left for the day, Chuck stayed behind, leaning on the counter beside Steven. "You handled that well," Chuck said. Steven took a deep breath. "I'm trying." Chuck gave a rare, genuine smile. "You did more than try. You turned a gang of bullies into a team." Steven chuckled softly. "Temporary team," Chuck shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe this is exactly why you bought the bar." Steven looked at him, surprised. "Why I bought it?" Chuck nodded. "Something tells me this place, these people, they're your next mission." Steven didn't answer. Not yet, but deep down, he knew Chuck wasn't wrong. The Rusty Bear wasn't just a bar, it was a second chance. For the town, for the bikers, and maybe, for Steven himself. Night settled over the Rusty Bear with a strange kind of calm one the old bar hadn't felt in years. Outside, the neon sign flickered weakly, half-lit, but somehow even that looked hopeful now. Inside, Steven sat alone at the counter, elbows resting on polished wood, listening to the distant hum of motorcycles riding away peacefully, instead of violently. Chuck walked in slowly, carrying 2 bottles of water. "No alcohol tonight," he said, sliding one toward Steven. "We've had enough action for a whole month." Steven smirked and uncapped the bottle. "I'll drink to that." They sat in silence for a moment, the comfortable, earned kind of silence. "You really did it," Chuck finally said. "Turned this place around in one day." Steven shook his head. "No. They chose to turn around. I just gave them direction." Chuck looked at him thoughtfully, like he was seeing a much younger version of his old friend. "You've always been that guy. Even back in the old days." Steven didn't answer. He just stared at the empty space where chaos had once lived. Bar fights, shattered bottles, fear, all replaced, at least for tonight, by peace. After a long moment, Steven spoke softly. "Chuck, why did you really come yesterday?" Chuck chuckled. "Thought I told you. Came for the fun." Steven raised an eyebrow. Chuck sighed. "All right. The truth?" "I knew you were drifting." "Drifting?" "Yeah," Chuck said. "From purpose, from people, from yourself." Steven looked away, eyes heavy. "I just wanted a quiet life." "You deserve one," Chuck agreed. "But quiet doesn't mean empty. It doesn't mean disappearing." Steven stared at the bar. "So you think this place? This is what I'm supposed to do?" Chuck gestured at the freshly cleaned space. "You tell me. In one day, you changed the environment of an entire gang. You gave them a path they didn't even know existed." Steven sighed deeply. "I didn't plan any of this." Chuck placed a hand on the counter. "Most meaningful things in life aren't planned. They just happen." Outside, the wind rustled through the old sign, making it creak softly. Steven listened, feeling something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose, direction, responsibility. Not the violent kind he used to carry, not the heavy kind forced on him by old missions or governments. A new kind, a quieter kind. Chuck stood up and walked around the bar, checking the lights, wiping a stray piece of dust like he'd owned the place for years. Then he leaned on the counter again. "You know why you handled those bikers so well?" Chuck asked. "Why?" "Because you weren't fighting their fists, you were fighting their hopelessness." Steven blinked. He hadn't thought of it that way. Chuck continued. "People don't act tough because they are strong. They act tough because they're scared of being small." Steven frowned. "You think they'll stay on this new path?" Chuck shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. But you gave them the first push." Silence settled again. Then Steven's phone buzzed. A message from Rocco. "Shelving designs ready. Sending you options tomorrow." Another from Diesel. "I found the right tools for the sign. We'll start next week." Another from Hawk. "I talked to the locals. Word spreading good." Steven stared at the screen for a long moment. Chuck smirked. "Looks like your new employees are eager." Steven didn't laugh, but the small smile on his lips was real. He stood up, walked to the window, and looked outside. The street was calm. The town was breathing easier. And for the first time in years, so was he. Chuck joined him. So, what now? Steven took a slow breath. Now? We build something worth keeping. Chuck nodded approvingly. Sounds like a mission I can get behind. Steven turned toward him. You staying a while? Chuck grinned. You kidding? I want the corner table. Best one in the house. Steven chuckled and shook his head. You never change. That's why you keep me around, Chuck said, tapping his shoulder. They picked up their jackets, walked toward the exit, and stepped outside into the cool night. As Steven locked up, he glanced at the faded sign above him. The Rusty Bear, old, beat up, rough around the edges, but still standing, much like him. He whispered quietly to himself, maybe this place needs me. Maybe I need it too. Chuck heard him and smiled. Ready to go, partner? Steven nodded. Yeah, let's go. Together. They walked down the quiet street, two legends, two friends, stepping into whatever came next. No violence, no ego, just purpose, and a bar that finally had a future.